My name is Jane Borowski, host of Invisible Tears. This podcast will be about my story in my words, talking about my own personal experiences in self-healing. I do not claim to be a therapist, counselor, or a licensed psychologist.
Hello, my name is Amanda Bedard, and I'm the co-host, producer, and editor of Invisible Tears. I'm a Reiki master, certified professional life coach, spiritual coach, wellness coach, and a counseling practitioner. Some of the content you will hear in this podcast may be disturbing to some. Viewer discretion is advised, but it is our hope by putting this information out there that we may help others to heal. We will always be a platform for truth and healing. This is Invisible Tears.
Hi, I'm Jane, and I'm here with my co-host, Amanda. Hi, Amanda.
Hello.
And this is Invisible Tears. We had the pleasures of interviewing John Philpin.
Oh, it was such a fantastic interview. And for those of you that don't know who John Philpin is, definitely do some research on him. He's an amazing man with an amazing career. He's an independent criminal profiler and a retired psychologist. He has an international reputation as being the expert on violent behavior. With this, he's appeared on numerous shows. He's also contributed to many books, given that he was a consultant. He's also written several books of his own. He's received numerous awards for his contribution into murder investigations and his forensic work. He also holds degrees in English, clinical psychology, and forensic psychology from Harvard and Goddard College. And Jane met John because he was part of the Connecticut River Valley Serial Killer Task Force.
Yeah, the first time I met him, he was my first hypnosis session. I met up with him again, and we had a second hypnosis session. And we stayed connected all these years, 30 plus years. Incredible man, extremely compassionate. It amazes me on how he has studied so much evil, but yet stays so compassionate and just so humble.
Yeah.
Very humble.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're sort of immersed in that world, and I think that you all will hear this too as we play cuts of the interview with him. When you're immersed in that world and you have to sort of try to put yourself into a different set of, morals and values, it could be very hard to pull yourself out of that world. But yes, he's an extremely intelligent and compassionate man, and you guys will definitely hear that throughout this interview. And so John starts off with just explaining where it all began.
I developed an interest in violent behavior growing up. I was the seventh child in what was a fairly violent family in a violent neighborhood. I do remember being very curious, why people would do things like this to each other for what seemed to me to be little or no provocation. I learned very early to read bodies, to read faces, to read lips for that matter. The experience in the hospital, not just with the kids, if there were emergencies involving adult patients, male staff were called in for restraint purposes. And there were very few of us, so there were about 1,000 patients, I believe, at the time in the hospital. And there weren't that many male staff. Most of them had been drafted. That was where I experienced a resurgence of this whole interest, because it just seemed like out of the blue, these violent episodes could begin. And I started looking at it more closely. I became friendly with a psychiatrist who was something of an expert on violence. And I used to talk a great deal with him. And where I just felt that I needed to know more. I wanted to know why these things happened. I also had this streak in me that was not only opposed to war, but opposed to any kind of individual act of violence committed by one person against another. And then, all of a sudden it was people who didn't know each other. And out of the blue, one person would attack another. And I didn't get it. I mean, this was, to me, it was just something that seemed to be a part of the culture, but I wanted to know more about it. So I did my master's degree work in clinical psychology, and then went on for my PhD, which I decided should be in forensic psychology. And by then, I'd begun a psychology, whatever they called it, internship in a group practice. And the first major contract I had was with the state corrections department. And if you want to study violence, I can't think of a better place to do it than a jail. And so I did. I spent a lot of time in prisons in Vermont.
When John is given a case to look at, he first starts with profiling the victim, and then he moves on to the criminology part of the case.
You always have to start with the victim in order to know how she, and I use that pronoun advisedly because the vast majority of these cases are committed by males against females. And I would want to know her. I would want to know how she might react in certain situations, that type of thing. And so I began it that way. I didn't realize it at the time, but I was developing a system that was, my own. It was unique. And Quantico was just barely getting started then. It was, I think, 79 when they started organizing it. It wasn't until about 84 until they were operating full tilt. But at any rate, then I went to visit the various sites that were involved in the crime. And I got an education for myself. And that was that by doing that, by immersing myself in especially the murder site, that there was just a lot of intuitive kind of information available, from the environment itself, from imagining how it would go down, looking at everything from sticks on the ground, rocks, disturbances in the dirt, the whole thing, and developing what I eventually called the choreography of the crime of murder. And from those experiences, incorporating initially intuitive, totally subjective feelings, ideas, thoughts about what sort of person might do this to another human being. And as I did that, what I had to do was to forego my own sense of logic, my own sense of morality, my own sense of reasoning, and try to incorporate what belonged to this killer into my own mind and think with those beliefs, those values, those morals, or lack thereof. And that turned out later on to be kind of a risky business, but I didn't realize it at the time, and I plowed ahead with it. Now, that case did result in a profile, and I'm using the word because everybody does, but I still don't like it. Anyway, I have to say no profile or whatever else you want to call it ever caught a killer. Never happened. Not by anyone who wrote it. Also, the initial feeling about these things was that there was some kind of document that you submitted, and that was it. Your work was done. And that was never the way I viewed it. There was an initial document, yes, but working through any crime is an organic process, because your information is going to change. How can something that is cast in stone 6 months ago going to help you now? You have 10 new pieces of information. It isn't going to help you. So it was no good, from my point of view, simply to write a report, submit it, and say, okay, there, I'm done. Nonsense. My philosophy was that once you accept the case, you're in it, until there is some resolution, if there is a resolution. And that was the way I operated.
John talks about his interviews with Gary Schaefer, who was arrested and charged with the murder of Katie Richards. John was brought in to work on a local case for Teresa Fenton, who was found murdered and raped in 1980. John believed that Gary Schaefer was responsible for Teresa Fenton.
So I had a total of 15 hours. It was 5 3-hour sessions with Gary Schaefer. But I avoided, they were all taped, I avoided saying anything about Teresa Fenton. He had not been charged in that case. He was charged with Katie's death. But he went there himself, and, that was his choice. That was, not something that I forced him to do. And eventually, he, over the course of that time and using a lot of the sort of, interview approaches that I had acquired, developed, learned, he openly confessed to Katie. It was sort of a backdoor confession to Teresa.
John was then asked to look at the Connecticut River Valley cases.
I think I heard something about 2 New Hampshire women missing within a relatively short period of time, like say within 1 year. And that, they were both to some extent involved in like nursing aid or something along those lines. They were also both considered to be pretty responsible people. One was Bernice Kudamarsh, and the other was Ellen Freed. And that was right around the 2 of them, like I say, within a year. And I remember I started to wonder, these are good, responsible people, dependable people. They go to work on time. They do what they're supposed to do. And so I thought, that it was just very unusual. Then bodies started turning up, or I should say remains. And that was when I expressed, it might have been Mike Prazo at the time. I think he was the chief in Claremont then. I think what I did was I called him and told him that I had this concern that these might be related. There wasn't enough of the remains to be able to determine initially what the cause of death had been, but I was familiar with Henry Ryan, medical examiner in Maine, who had a technique for detecting stab wounds from bones. And so I suggested that, and they followed up on it, and sure enough, both women had been stabbed to death. The places where the bodies were found, it was going toward Newport out of Claremont, and they were not all that far apart.
Their bodies were found 500 feet apart or something like that.
So, yes, it was right in the same area, right along that river, whatever that river is, Sugar River, maybe, I don't know. And then, it was shortly after that Ava Morse vanished. Her body was found more quickly than the others. But by then they were up to 3, and really starting to be concerned that they had a serial killer.
Shortly after Barbara Agnew's murder, they formed a task force between Vermont and New Hampshire.
Right around the time that Barbara Agnew was killed, and that I think was like 86, so say 84, 85, when we started gathering cases from throughout the Northeast to look at them, to look for others. There was a considerable amount of debate. I was a member of the task force, and it was the first interstate task force, interjurisdictional task force that the two states had, which had always been sort of a bug to me that jurisdictions couldn't cooperate. Well, this proved that they could, and total sharing of information, total sharing of capabilities, and we conducted several meetings. Well, we had a lot of good input, but it wasn't until Barbara Agnew was killed that we had a call from the New London, New Hampshire Police Department about the Kathy Milliken case. And several of us went over to New London to look at their case file. And I took one look at the pictures, and yes, it was Kathy Milliken, but it might as well have been Barbara Agnew. They were treated almost identically. And that was when things kind of went, full bore. We were looking at every lead. We had several suspects. We had, I don't even remember what the grand total was of the number of similar cases. Just enough to kind of bring them into our scope. We looked at upstate New York, had great cooperation from them. We had Vermont, New Hampshire, good cooperation from Massachusetts. We didn't get squat from the state of Maine, and it turned out they had a serious problem over there.
After John describes the formation of the task force, he then goes into detail of the suspect's hunting methodology.
This guy was a cruiser that he set out knowing what he was going to do, not knowing who the victim would be.
I call it hunting.
Where he might find it.
Yes, Jane said that she calls it hunting, is what she actually calls
yes,
it. Yeah.
Well, eventually that's what we called it, was hunting. We called it a trap line, in fact, that he had specific places that were on his route. And he may have had more than one route, Gary Schaefer had 2 or 3 different routes. We don't know that, but as far as having a trap line, a place where he would check, where he considered it highly likely that he would find a lone female victim, vulnerable, in an isolated place where he was extremely unlikely to be observed. And that's what he was looking for. That's what he was cruising around for. And then I shifted gears and kind of went backward to what sets this in motion, what gets him started. And I figured it was at the level of fantasy that had to be developed into reality. He would have a series of decisions to make, how long he was going to stay out, which route he could take, which route was the most likely to produce, something in the trap line, this entire sequence, which would begin by, I think, creating a degree of agitation that he would feel. But once he's in the car and on the road, It's like a hypnotic experience. Just completely calms down, completely relaxes, knows precisely what he's about. And if I remember what Jane told me years ago, this guy that attacked her seemed almost indifferent, just, kind of blank. And, that was the kind of thing that was going through my mind back in probably the middle days of the task force.
A couple of months after my attack, the detectives transported me to Springfield, Vermont to meet John in his office for one of 2 hypnosis sessions.
I remember several things about that. One was my own shock when I saw the scars on your neck. We had been sitting there talking, and I don't think we'd gotten into anything, substantive yet. And we're just sort of chatting. And I noticed the scars, and, then first thing that went through my mind was, where did this, poor person, get those horrible scars? And that was kind of the first time I realized the personal liability, because I had this guy, whoever he was, rolling around inside of my head for a long time. And, suddenly I connected myself, with inflicting wounds, and that was a horrible feeling. We went from that into trying to, if I remember right, trying to reconstruct everything that happened. And you went into some really detailed information.
Honestly, I don't remember. I know that I was hypnotized, but I don't remember anything I said. I guess I was in a deep hypnosis because I don't remember anything.
You were totally relaxed. I can't, gauge the depth of the hypnosis, but I can say that you were totally relaxed, and yet you were talking about some pretty horrendous things that had happened to you in a fairly calm manner. So, I'd be inclined to agree with you.
I think that was most of the reason why they wanted me to be hypnotized, to try to get the license plate, or a partial license plate is what I got. But I remember the license plate always being dirty. So I think that's why we never really got a real accurate plate.
No, I remember you saying that. Yeah, I do.
So unfortunately, we never really got an accurate plate. I don't even think we got the state, did we?
We got 662, I think.
Yeah.
That's what we had. We tried to go on from there, but that's where it stopped, 662, I think.
Yeah.
So how did you and John, Jane, how did you guys end up linking up? How did you guys end up getting to that hypnosis session?
The state police.
It was New Hampshire's version of Mike LeClaire.
Mike LeClaire brought me there. And was hoping that we would be able to get more info, especially the license plate was the big focal point of the hypnosis.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsors. And now back to our episode.
Now, did the characteristics of the attacker change in your mind after Jane's attack, or did it just reaffirm what you were thinking prior?
Well, it pretty much reaffirmed what I was thinking. Everything, as far as the investigations, the various investigations by now that were, had been going on, if anything, they were rejuvenated, and people started going over cases again and going over suspects again. All of that happened very quickly. In my own mind, this sounded very much like, the person we had been looking for. Go Marlowe's may very well have been one of his regular stops. I went down there around midnight one night and sat in my car. It was a truck, actually, in front of the soda machine, and just to see what sort of traffic there was. And the only traffic there was a woman by herself who went to get a soft drink,
And this was after my attack.
Yes.
Mm.
It was after I had seen you at least one of the times. But it just occurred to me I wanted a feel for the place. The most important thing that came out of that for me was the possibility of variation in the color of the vehicle caused by the sodium vapor lights.
Yeah, that was a question
poles.
quite a bit. Yeah, they were leaning. They were leaning like dark green or brown because of the lighting.
It could have been, the range changed just so significantly, of what it would do to various shades of tan, gray, green, whether, it was a polished kind of surface or just a flat color. All of that was affected. But that was, like the main thing that struck me. That and the isolation, I guess, also was another part of it.
Yeah. Why do you think the Connecticut River Valley murders are unsolved?
Well, time went by, as we both know. A lot of the people, well, some of them have died. A lot of them have retired. I've been retired for 20 years now. Mike LeClaire here in Vermont, he's retired.
Yeah, he retired shortly after my attack.
Yes, I think you're right.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was a whole new crew came in, and it was at the time when every department everywhere wanted to have a cold case unit. And I do not have a very high opinion, I'm afraid, of cold case units. My experiences with them have been that they go back to, work that was done years before and settle on a suspect who was generated years before, but obviously must have been omitted for some reason or cleared in some way. And the kicker for me was Linda Moore. They kept focusing on Steve.
Yeah.
And the poor guy went through 2 inquests in Vermont, 3 polygraphs, spaced over time, obviously. And he was cleared. Plus, his alibi was solid. Mm-hmm. But, this cold case unit, I had one meeting that I attended maybe 4 or 5 years ago when they were getting this thing rolling again, and I asked the stupid question about suspects. And, we're taking a closer look at Steve. And that was it for me, this guy had been cleared in so many ways.
So many ways. That poor man had gone through so much with them. I've met him, and he's gone through so much with them. He he's cleared himself over and over and over again.
Yes.
And they just keep
Yes.
going back to him, and I don't get it.
Yeah. Nor do I. I don't get it either.
No.
I think it's these new people coming in. They're younger. They want to establish themselves. They want to make a mark, and they have what they have, and that's the same information that we had. How far did we get? We didn't get very far.
Exactly.
And they would have to generate new information. They would have to find new approaches. I kept suggesting for a couple of years that they start making use of media more. And, my idea at the time was to say something about there being, announce it as if it were a new investigation. And, that people who had been talked to in the past would be interviewed again, and there were some new people to interview. Even if there weren't, it didn't matter. Just generate just a little bit of anxiety.
Well, I know New Hampshire has a cold case website, and I've always been on that website, My Attack, related to the Connecticut River Valley murders, and so has Linda Moore. Now, I went on there about a month ago, and I was removed, and so wasn't Linda Moore, which doesn't make any sense to me. We've always been on there, but all of a sudden we're removed off that list. And I'm confused by that. I'm so confused by that.
I don't see why they would do that. I have no idea why they would do that.
It doesn't make sense, does it?
No, it makes no sense at all. The other thing that bothers me tremendously is this whole question of the possibility of forensic testing of some residue information, hair or fiber or whatever it is. I don't even know what it is.
Well, I have to say, I went up there about 10 years ago and asked, because now DNA is available. And I can remember when I was in the hospital right after my attack, they scraped my fingernails.
Yes.
And supposedly they kept it. So about 10 years ago, I went up and started questioning about my evidence because, now that DNA is out, why aren't they starting to, test my evidence for this DNA, any kind of DNA they can find? And right. I went up there and I was told all my evidence is gone.
Okay, did they say why?
No, he had no answer to that. And after he went in, he was gone for about 45 minutes and came back. He put me in this little room, came back, and he said the evidence to my case is gone. He couldn't talk about it anymore, and he's sorry that he couldn't give me any more information. But the funny thing is, then they called me 2 years ago and said, and I haven't heard from them all these years. And they called me about 2 years ago and said, we're reinvestigating your case. We are going through fingerprints. Can you come and get re-fingerprinted? Okay, I've been fingerprinted already, but yes, I can go and get re-fingerprinted. And they said, okay, we'll call you, try and arrange something in a couple of weeks. That was 2 years ago, and I still haven't heard back from them. So I don't know if they found my fingerprints or what, but I haven't heard from them in 2 years, ever since that.
You're getting the same runaround from them that I think her name is Anna Agnew.
Anna Agnew, sister. Yes.
All right, that she's getting from the Vermont side about Barbara.
Exactly.
Well, the story changes. It depends. Sometimes, oh, that's gone. Sometimes we had a couple of floods over here, and one of the evidence depots, they're always in the basement, by the way, got flooded, and a lot of evidence was destroyed. We get that story. We get there never was any evidence. In the Linda Moore case, it started out with that one broken fingernail. Well, that was never tested, for DNA. Everybody knew that the fingernail existed.
Yeah.
And yet for a while they were saying they couldn't find it. They don't know what happened to it. Maybe it got lost in a move. All right. Well, then somebody asked me to. I can't remember why. To go back and look at Dr. McQuillan's autopsy report on Linda Moore. I did that. It wasn't just one nail. There were three. And whatever testing was done back at the time eliminated Steve, but there was a foreign DNA male on one of those nails. But you can't get any further information.
I mean, you would think that they would run it through CODIS.
Yeah, well, one would hope.
I think the reason why a lot of these cases, or all these cases, aren't solved is a lot of missed opportunities. I just don't understand
missed opportunity, and I think not understanding the dynamic that's involved with a string of assaults and murders like this. Well, it stopped. Okay, that's another one you hear, by the way, that you were the last.
Well, that's a good question,
stopped.
too, John. Why do you think it stopped after my attack?
There's a couple of possibilities. One would be that the guy is dead. One would be that he was arrested on some other charge somewhere and is serving time. Another would be that he'd moved from the area. I mean, there are a lot of possibilities. Typically, these people, in my experience anyway, sometimes can go long periods of time, I'm talking years, without a repetition of the behavior, and then suddenly have it emerge again. There's so much we don't know about how these people operate in the wild. All of the research that's been done with offenders who are incarcerated, and they have plenty of time to put together their own agenda. You go in there with a questionnaire, which is the way they do it, and you're wearing a suit and tie, and that guy's wearing chains and an orange jumpsuit. You've immediately created a distance between you and him.
Yeah, exactly.
You haven't exactly invited him to be cooperative with you at that point. And then you're restricting the range of the conversation by adhering to this stupid questionnaire. I never used the questionnaire. I went in and freelanced it. I mean, we were going to chat, and sometimes the Gainesville guy comes to mind, Danny Rowling, Florida student killer. We must have just talked about everything from fishing to him telling me what it was like to live near the bayous in Louisiana. But then he made the transition, I didn't, into his quote-unquote love life. And that's where I started to get some meaningful information about what went down in Florida. But when you impose all of this structure, what you're doing is you're sending this guy a message that you are somehow in control over him, and you are not.
Yeah.
Unless you let him go and just talk about what he wants to talk about. So he has an agenda. Let him run it through, and then once it's done, just start talking to him.
Yeah.
This is going to sound terrible to you, I'm sure, but regardless of the fact that the person sitting across from you at the table is a horrible, evil, destructive person, he's still a human being.
Okay, yeah, I have a hard time with that. I do, because I feel that he has no remorse for what he done to me. So why should I consider him any kind of a human being? Because what kind of a human being does that to somebody, you know, who attacks a woman that's 7 months pregnant and stabs her 27 times? That to me, that's not a human. That's a monster.
I couldn't agree with you more. But you aren't the one walking into the room to sit down and talk with him.
And you're that's right. That's true. That's true.
You know, and so, yes, it takes an adjustment on my part, but if I can see him, just for the sake of the conversation we're going to have, as a human being, and treat him that way, and shoot the breeze, and talk about what it was like growing up, and pretty soon, you know, I'm going to start to get some relevant information. You know, one of the complaints I've often had is that my process takes too long. Well, that's true. It does. It takes a long time. Gary Schaefer's situation, it was 15 hours. But I do get the information.
Exactly. If you're getting the information, it shouldn't matter how long it takes.
Yes, you're effective.
No, it doesn't. You can't. The other thing is, you know, the attitude is one of, like, it has to be something, this information, as they get it on their questionnaires, has to be set up in such a way that it can be put into a computer and, you know, put out on a spreadsheet, and then they can compare and they can give you percentages about this and percentages. Well, the percentages aren't going to help. Every case is different. Every person is different. And they just don't seem to understand that.
John, you have studied so much evil. How do you separate that evil you study at work? How do you separate that from your home life? Or do you? Do you take it home with you? Have you taken it home with you?
I didn't in the beginning, and I think I mentioned this. I didn't realize the nature of the risks I was running. And it did go home with me. It was impossible to escape. And that's right from case one, Teresa, 12-year-old kid. My God, that haunted me. It disturbs your sleep. It becomes a distraction. You find yourself thinking about it. You know, you're trying to enjoy your lunch, but your head is somewhere, you know, totally different. And that, you know, goes on for a lengthy period of time. And fortunately, you know, I realized it after maybe 15 years, you know, and I could see that it was really starting to wear me down. And, you know, I had to make some real changes in my lifestyle, you know, which I did do. And, you know, that seems to have worked out.
Now, you're married.
Yes, very happily, 52, going on 53 years.
Oh, congrats.
Congratulations.
Yeah, really, that's great. And I believe her name...
What's that?
I believe her name is Jane.
Jane, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I like to say we met in a mental hospital, which, you know, immediately gets people wondering. She was an occupational therapist, and I was a counselor, and we met at Mass Mental, and have been together ever since. And this was no picnic for her either, you know. And I had, at the time I started all of this, I had a little one. My son Stephen was, I think, 5 when I first started going to jail, so that used to worry him sick. He was afraid they wouldn't let me out. They wouldn't feed me. And I'd get these gigantic hugs, you know, at the end of the day when I got home.
That must have been nice.
Yeah, well, it was, but I had to do my best to reassure him. I'd say I'm there on business. They're not going to keep me there. They can't keep me there. And I would try to reassure him in a lot of different ways. And then when, Teresa Fenton case happened, I was distracted quite a bit. And I made some, unusual trips that, consumed time that I might otherwise have been spending with him. And I regret that. But, when it was time to get my act together, I think I was able to do that. He and I have a great relationship now. Of course, he's, 45 years old now.
And you're retired, so that gives you time together.
Yes, and I don't read those books anymore. In fact, when I closed my practice and declared myself retired, I still had a few cases. I had a guy in Maine who had been in jail for 27 years. He never committed the crime. And I did that one just, he didn't have any money. I didn't care about that anyway. And, I worked with some folks over there, and one retired guy from the FBI who was quite good, actually. It surprised me. He's out now. The court ended up agreeing that he was 16 when he went in. He was 44 when he came out for a crime he did not commit.
Wow.
That was a different year for me altogether. But no, I switched, and I do read occasionally, some political analysis type books, and I've decided that they're just as evil as the other stuff I was reading. So I'm going to have to shift again, find
now,
something else.
You did a lot of writing, but you never wrote a book about the Connecticut River Valley murders.
No, I never did. Well, Phil's book is a definitive book. I suppose I could have written one from my point of view, which, the others that I wrote, that's the way they are done. I was consultants in all of those cases. But I didn't feel like, I had that much additional to say, to add, to what Phil had already done. So,
I think you did.
Well, it's possible. I've had 2 strokes, and they've affected the part of the brain that does all the logic and reasoning and vocabulary.
As we finish up our interview with John, I ask him one last thing. What would you say? What message do you give to victims' families or victims or survivors such as myself? And this was his response.
Something akin to your own words about, don't expect it to go away. Don't expect the pain to just suddenly disappear, the emotional pain. It would be more things along those lines. You have to own it. It happened to you. It's shaped and will continue to shape your life.
That it has. That it has.
Well, those would be the kinds of things that I would say and have said. I think the sort of vacuous expressions of, I feel so sorry or bad or my heart goes out, I find all of that very trite and not particularly informative. I would not say something like that.
Mm-hmm.
I tried to be as realistic about it as I possibly could.
Exactly, and I don't expect any less from you. It was a horrible situation that brought us
into, well, being together, knowing one another. But, I admire you, and I realize what you've been through, and I think you're going to end up being a much stronger person for it. And I think you're going to help a lot of people.
Oh, thank you. I hope so.
Oh, I know so.
John, I can't thank you enough for doing this with me.
Jane, anytime, any assistance, anything, you've got the number, just give me a call.
I will.
And maybe we'll have to do another one of those lunches down at that.
That would be
place
great. I would love that.
Thank you all so much for listening to this episode of Invisible Tears. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast, hear all future episodes. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram. We also have a website, invisible-tears.com, where you can keep current with any events that may be happening with our podcast, read more about Jane and the team, and read more about all the Connecticut River Valley unsolved cases.
If you are looking for everyday items, clothes, collectibles, or a gift for that special someone, you can support us further by checking out our retail store, the Frugal Marketplace. We can be found at thefrugalmarketplace.com or search for us on eBay and Poshmark. We hold an online claim sale on Facebook Live every Monday night at 7 p.m. where you can find our latest items for sales or items at a deep discount. If you're local to the area, please stop in and say hi. You can find us at 919 West Swansea Road in Swansea, New Hampshire. The links for our products can be found in our show notes.
If you want to learn more about my wellness practice, Guided Path Wellness, head to guidedpathwellness.org. There you can read more about me and my certifications, more about the Reiki and coaching services I offer both in person and remote, and read all about my products for sale that I make through the practice. Feel free to utilize the Contact Us section on the website with any questions, or utilize that free 15-minute consultation booking button if you have any questions about what might work for you. Evil may exist in this world, but we will not let it win. See you next episode.